Goodness me, wrestling is dangerous. It feels like we don't really need to say that about an industry which sees dudes being hurled through glass, dudes being set on fire, and dudes like New Jack being employed. At us, New Jack, if you come to the UK, Jack the Jobber has promised to fight you, and that's in his contract. He has to do it. Over the course of professional wrestling history, superstars both inside WWE and out have racked up countless horrific injuries, all in the pursuit of entertaining a fan base who will take a half glance at an inverted 450 through some light tubes and pronounce it to be fake and gay. While the number of wrestlers who have perished in the ring is thankfully small, although not zero, the number of men who've come inches from collar and elbow tying it up with the Reaper is considerably bigger. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic.com, and here are the top 10 wrestlers who came inches from death. Join us. Number 10, CESARO lands on his head. When asked to name the scariest wrestling moment of the last 5 years, sad to say that Bray Wyatt and his vanilla brand of Scooby-Doo spookums has nothing to do with it. Instead, that moment took place at Clash of Champions 2016. It was the blow-off to the month-long Best of 7 series between the Swiss Superman and Sheamus, when CESARO took a run-up and launched himself through the ropes at the Celtic Warrior. Now, it's hard to say whether CESARO was going for an ordinary tope and over-rotated, or a sort of mid-rope cannonball and under-rotated. Point is, he landed on his goddamn head. A sudden gasp echoed around the arena and across the world, as many fans thought they'd just seen someone paralyze themselves on live TV. And honestly, the way he landed on his head and neck, it's a full-blown miracle that CESARO lived to wrestle another day. Number 9, Chuck Austin lands on his head. CESARO may still be wrestling today and occasionally smashing his teeth inside his own jaw, but Chuck Austin wasn't so lucky. In the early 90s, Austin had only been training for about 6 months when he was hired by WWE to team with Lanny Poffo and enhance the talents of the Rockers by losing to them. Jannetty went to hit Austin with the Rocker Dropper, which to unaware fans was basically a Fameasser with an extra wrist lock. Austin took the move, landing directly on the top of his head, instantly paralyzing him. Jannetty, unaware of the severity of Austin's injury, then immediately rolled him over for the pin, an action that could have very easily killed him. Austin took WWE to court and won, but still hasn't regained the ability to walk. Wrestling is goddamn scary, folks. Number 8, Hayabusa lands on his head. Oh, and speaking of goddamn scary, a lot of this list is taken up with bad landings. After all, it's how most of wrestling's horrific injuries happen, with a slight under or over rotation often being the difference between health and the end of somebody's career. Hayabusa had a very bad landing. A very highly respected Japanese wrestler, especially notable for his career in frontier martial arts wrestling, Hayabusa is regarded as one of the greatest wrestlers to never work a day for Vince McMahon, and his decorated career was ended in an instant on October 22nd, 2001. He was wrestling a match against Mammoth Sasaki when Hayabusa attempted a springboard moonsault. He slipped on the middle rope, fell backwards and landed awfully on his head, cracking multiple vertebrae and paralyzing him for nearly 15 years. Hayabusa was eventually able to regain the ability to walk, tragically only a year before his death in 2016. Number 7, TAZZ takes a pile driver. So many terrible things happening to people's heads and necks. The pile driver is a distant memory in WWE, except when CM Punk and John Cena are busting them out like naughty boys, just begging to be sent to the principal's office. The health risks of pile drivers are obvious. They involve a head going straight down to the floor, and, well, if normal pile drivers are dangerous, spike pile drivers are the devil himself. A spike pile driver is when another wrestler aids the descent of the victim being plowed into the mat, often by jumping from the middle rope and forcing them down. Super dangerous, as TAZZ found out all too well in ECW. Too Cold Scorpio and Dean Malenko delivered such a pile driver to TAZZ, who broke his neck upon impact. Of course, because he's TAZZ, he finished the match, and when he was finally dragged to an emergency room, the doctors told him, in no uncertain terms, yeah, that should have killed you. Number 6, Mick Foley nearly strangles himself to death. Mick Foley has forged a legacy of flirting with oblivion. He was severely concussed in his Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker, he was severely concussed in his I Quit match with The Rock, and he spent several years putting very important arteries in close proximation with barbed wire. But no brush with death has left such a permanent mark on Foley that during a match with Vader in Munich. Foley, forever the suicidal showman, was a big fan of getting his head tangled in the ring ropes, looking like he was being strangled. What he didn't know was the ropes he wrapped his neck up in had just been severely tightened. Foley was in, but he couldn't get out, and the pressure around his neck was so great that he came very close to passing out and dying. The ropes were so tight that when Foley fortunately managed to wrench himself free, he unfortunately ended up ripping off most of his ear in doing so. Number 5, Tyson Kidd gets muscle busted. Few things teach you that life is cruelly unfair more than a terribly timed wrestling injury. Tyson Kidd was one of the most reliable hands on the WWE roster for years, but he had never really made his mark on the main roster, All that was set to change when he teamed with CESARO. Both men were good friends, complemented each other in the ring, and fought their way to a tag team championship run. CESARO and Kid were on their way towards becoming the backbone of the WWE tag scene when something horrible happened to the backbone of Tyson Kidd. In a dark match against Samoa Joe in June 2015, Kid was dropped with a muscle buster, a move that drives the victim down on their upper back. Kid landed awkwardly, suffering a severe neck and spinal injury which necessitated staples, 4 screws, and a rod being inserted in his neck. It was an injury that reportedly only 5% of people survived, and we're hugely glad that Kid was part of that 5%. Number 4, DROZ is paralyzed. It was one of the most high-profile wrestling injuries in wrestling because it happened right at the apex of the Attitude Era when all eyes were on WWE. In 1999, Darren Drozdov wrestled a match against D'Lo Brown and suffered a tragic mistiming of a running powerbomb. The taped match has never been aired by WWE for obvious reasons, but the accident was described like this. Droz wore a loose-fitting shirt to the match, the lack of grip on which impaired Brown's ability to lift into a fully seated position before slamming to the mat directly on his head and neck. Droz, previously one of the stars of the now infamous Beyond the Mat documentary, suffered 2 fractured discs in his neck, was paralyzed, and nearly died there and then. While Droz has since regained some movement in his arms, he still cannot walk and remains one of the most high-profile cautionary tales in the business. Number 3, Gangrel gets hangrelled. It seems almost appropriate that a character as gothic as Gangrel should nearly be killed in such a theatrical, macabre way. In the late 90s, Gangrel's posse of flamboyant vampires were feuding with the Ministry, the Undertaker's posse of flamboyant disciples. Basically, the late 90s were super intense and stupid. One segment called for the Big Boss Man to tie a rope around Gangrel's neck, throw him over the top rope, and hang him. Despite having concerns about the untested rope, Gangrel agreed to the stunt, went over the top rope, and, well, he was hanged. The rope clenched tight around his neck, legitimately choking him out, with Gangrel saying that everything started to fade away around him. Thankfully, he was released before he passed out. Number 2, Steve Austin breaks his neck. Also nearly suffocates. And hey, speaking of suffocation, turns out that Steve Austin was almost killed by WWE twice in his illustrious career. The most notable and widely known incident took place at SummerSlam 1997 when Owen Hart delivered a botched sit-out tombstone pile driver to Austin, compressing his neck and almost permanently paralyzing him. The incident that people might be less aware of took place in 1999 when Steve Austin drove a monster truck into Raw. The segment itself went off without a hitch, but Austin nearly died preparing for it. He was sat in the truck in the holding area with the engine running, waiting for his cue to drive in. The holding area was relatively small, it wasn't ventilated, and Austin was held waiting for his cue for over 3 minutes. Long story short, Austin nearly passed out from the exhaust fumes. Yes, they almost gassed Stone Cold Steve Austin. And in a total act of irony, the segment that Austin was supposed to crash was The Rock holding a pretend funeral for him. And number 1, X-Pac tears his ass pack. Hooray! Something that isn't about heads and necks. Wait, what happened to X-Pac? Oh, Jesus Christ, that's horrible. X-Pac, as many of you will know, was a big fan of the Bronco Buster, where he would throw himself at an opponent propped up in the corner and theatrically jump up and down on their chest. Harmless fun, except when, oh my God, X-Pac tore open his anus. In 2013, he missed the move, slammed into the turnbuckle, and I really want to stop saying it, but suffered from a severely torn rectum. X-Pac finished the match, but in the process of doing so, lost so much blood that had he not been immediately taken to hospital, he would have died. There are a great many noble ways to die. Tearing open your butt in the pursuit of wrestling theatrics is not one of them. And that's our list. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and you can follow me on Twitter here. If you want to support what we do here at Cultaholic, head to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Cultaholic. And of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us.